Hi, I'm Devin Alexander. If it weren't for my Italian grandmother, I don't know where I'd be today or how much I'd weigh. She taught me how to cook at an early age, so cook I did. And I put on the pounds too. But today, believe it or not, I cook to keep the weight off. So stick around for some of my childhood favorites. I've just gotten started on my grandmother's marinara sauce. I have just a little bit of olive oil, 1 tablespoon. You don't want to use too much, and you don't even need that much. And some onions and garlic. So I'm getting that started. You just want that to sweat a little bit. You don't actually want it to brown. And then I'm going to continue chopping my parsley here. Now, spaghetti day was so happy in my childhood. When I would come home from school and my mom would say, put on your spaghetti shirt, I knew dinner was going to be great. The spaghetti shirt was this red shirt that I had that I always had to wear when we were eating spaghetti because my mom didn't want me to ruin my clothes with all the red sauce. My brother and sister had one too. I wasn't just incredibly sloppy myself, but we always loved it. Get this parsley. Oh, that sounded good. Let me just give this a stir. Now, my grandmother didn't actually have a recipe for this sauce or her meatballs until I pressed her for one. She always just kind of did it by memory. And when I asked her about it, I was like, well, how much parsley do you put in? And she would say, or about a handful. And then I would ask her how much whatever you put in. And I just couldn't get it right. So finally, one day, I'm so glad I did this. I sat down with her and I said, okay, I'm going to watch you bake it. So I was finally able to make it right. Oh, right. That looks good on that. This another minute. Now, Nan always she used crushed tomatoes and tomato paste, but she always used the ones that were on sale. So it doesn't really matter what tomatoes you use. Although I will, at the end of this recipe, be adding a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt to the recipe. You can kind of adjust that with the tomatoes. Since canned tomatoes, some of them are sweet when they're canned, some aren't so sweet. So that's how you kind of figure out the way you like it. That is looking great. I'm gonna add my crushed tomatoes first. And then some tomato paste. This gives it that thick, rich flavor. And again, we have very little oil, only a tablespoon, and this makes 8 cups. Now, if you want the specifics on all the ingredients and everything, just go to discoveryhealth.com where you'll find this recipe and tons of others, plus a lot of tips. Stir that in, and then just add a little water so it's not too thick. We're gonna let this cook for a couple hours, so you don't want it to get too thick, and the water will help that. But you still get that rich tomato paste flavor. There we go, just a little bit more. So good. All right, get rid of this. And then I'm gonna move on to adding the seasonings. We have some dried basil, and then tons and tons of fresh chopped parsley, which 2 cups go in here, and it seems like a lot, but it's so good in the end. Plus, I love all the little green flecks in it. All this in here, and all of that. And then just a few little cloves. You don't want much of that, but this gives it a really distinctive flavor. I think Nan had a little Irish there also, and that's probably where that came from. Okay, and then a bay leaf. There we go. Stir that in. And as I said, we're gonna let this simmer for at least a few hours because it always tastes better later. And then I'm just gonna taste and see how it is. See how much sugar I need. It's pretty sweet already, but I can definitely use a little. So I'll just put a little bit in. And then some salt, of course. It's a little bit of that, too. Okay. Now, you know, I'll often have people tell me, oh, it's great that you can make all these light recipes, but I don't know how to cook. And that's always really curious to me because we all learn in kindergarten how to follow directions. And something like this, all you're doing says chop, you chop. Then you put it all together. And so anybody could make this meal. It's really easy. And if you put the Parsley in a food processor goes so quickly, but never put onions in a food processor. You always want to chop the onions as little as you can for the cut that you want. So obviously, if you're cutting tiny little pieces of onion, you need more cuts, but you don't want to chop them up in a food processor because it makes everything more sour. But that's just onions. Everything else is fine in a food processor. Okay, there we go. Give that another stir. And I think we're pretty set. We're just going to cover this, make sure our heat is as low as it can go, and we'll come back in a few hours, and I'll show you how to make Nan's meatballs. Welcome back. I'm Devin Alexander, and today I've already unveiled my grandmother's marinara sauce. Now I'm going to reveal another one of our family treasures, Nan's meatballs. Okay, we're gonna get started here by putting this bread in a bowl. And then we just wanna put milk over it so it softens, and then I'm gonna tear it apart. Now, I know a lot of people get meatballs from natural food stores, and they think, oh, it's a natural food store, it's healthy. It does trick you sometimes because you think that it's going to be healthy in a low-fat way. And it's not necessarily healthy in a low-fat way, it's just healthy in a not a lot of preservatives sort of way. So sometimes you'll have 3 of those little meatballs, and they could be like 200 calories and 15 grams of fat, and you thought you were doing good. It's the same thing with some restaurants have fresh in the title. That doesn't necessarily mean low in fat. It just means fresh. Looks great. Hands washed off. Then we're going to add some egg whites. Now, I find the easiest way to do this is to simply crack the egg into the bowl and then pick out the yolks. There we go. One more. Here. And with my hands, so quick, easy. Easy, and pretty easy. Got a tiny bit of yolk in there, but I'm not gonna worry about it. Each yolk has 5 grams of fat, so I barely put half a gram. And the texture is the same, so it doesn't really matter. Stir that up with a fork. And then I'm going to add some onions. This is such an easy recipe. Like if you're a novice cook and you think, oh, I don't know how to cook, this is a great one to start with. Throw some parsley in there. And then our chicken, I have 2 pounds of chicken here. And you can go to discoveryhealth.com to get all the recipes, the specifics on the ingredients, and any other tips you might want. And then always season things with salt and pepper. Just make sure you don't want to use too much salt. Keep the sodium low. Okay, a little bit of pepper. And that you can do according to your preference. Some people love a lot of black pepper, and others like me, not so much. Okay, that in there. Mix this all up. And then I always use an ice cream scoop to make my meatballs. That way you can make them much more uniform. You know what, I'm gonna jump in and do this with my hands because it's just more fun. And this is Kid Day, right? Reminding me of my childhood. It's a great one, again, for your kids to help you with. You know, my cousin has 4 children, all very young, and she always tells me that they love to eat the dinner much better when they've helped cook it. Something about kids and getting involved. They feel proud of what they've done, and then they want to eat it, even if it's healthier food. So I don't have kids myself, so I'm not sure if that's true of all children, but it's what I've heard from my friends. Now, this chicken mixture is a little sticky, so I usually keep my hands wet. It's easier to shape the meatballs. And then also you can always spray your meatball scooper with a tiny bit of olive oil spray just to keep it from sticking in there. And you can definitely, you don't need the scoop. You know what, my sauce is going crazy over here. I'm gonna give it a quick stir. You don't need the scoop. You can definitely just use your hands, but this is the way you make them perfectly uniform. Oh, and you know, I should grab my baking sheet now and spray that too. A little mist of spray. And you'll notice we didn't add any fat to these, so it's pretty much like eating chicken. I've seen people overspray that. Okay, put that on there, and I'm gonna get my hands a little more wet. This also helps you form the meatballs much more perfectly. If your hands are wet, it's not sticking and unshaping. There you go. You know, I love these meatballs on so many different things. As I said, because they're much lighter than the ones in the natural food stores, I use them all the time. I make meatball sandwiches. They're great to have in your refrigerator, chop up and use them on pizza. And, you know, you can never, ever, ever go wrong with leftover spaghetti and meatballs. It's a great thing to pack in your lunch, really, because it heats up in the microwave in a few seconds. Well, maybe half a minute or a minute at most if the microwave's not so strong. There you go. And then I usually try to make the meatballs about 2 inches in diameter. I think you could make them a little bit bigger, but don't you always prefer to have 2 of something over 1 of something? So I'd much rather eat 2 meatballs that are smaller than 1 big one. Maybe that's just me, but you just feel like, oh yeah, I had 2. We're getting there. See, they're coming along very nicely here. Getting them going. And these meatballs come in all different shapes, or the scoops come in all shapes and sizes. If you want to use the meatballs for soups or something, just get a smaller scoop. Okay, time to get those in the oven. Can't wait. And I have some waiting for me here already. Ah, they look great. Get them directly in my sauce. Oh, give that a stir first. I love these things. I can't wait to dig in. And I love when, you know, I have plenty of time to eat the leftovers. Okay. It's always better the next day anyway, as I said earlier. Okay. Stir these up. I think I'm just gonna have to give these a taste now. I've never been good about just, you know, putting them in the sauce and then walking away. Fork here. Ah. I love it. Okay. When I come back, I'm going to take you to my favorite part, dessert, where I'm going to revisit a childhood favorite there too, black and white cupcakes. Stay tuned. If you have trouble finding ground chicken breast or extra lean ground pork, don't cheat it. You don't need the extra fat and calories. Instead, ask your butcher to grind chicken breasts or pork tenderloin for you. They're very likely to do it at no extra charge. Or you can do it by yourself. Just cut the chicken or pork into cubes, put it in your food processor, and pulse it until it's about the same consistency as ground chicken or pork. You're likely to save a bundle. Welcome back. I'm Devin Alexander. Today, I'm traveling down memory lane and showing you some of the slim versions of some of my childhood favorites. So far, I've whipped up my Nan's spaghetti and meatballs, and now I'm going to teach you a recipe for cupcakes that is totally to die for. I call them Be a Babe black and white cupcakes. I'm going to start over here with all my dry ingredients. I'm going to add some flour and then cocoa powder. I use that instead of the blocks of cocoa because this has no oil or fat in it. Well, it has a tiny bit of fat, but comparatively, virtually none. Then we have some cornstarch, which will thicken this up, some baking soda, baking powder, and some salt. Here. Okay, then I just go through this with my fingers. You want to make sure there aren't any chunks of cocoa powder or anything in there that are going to glob up the mixture. It's so fun with my fingers. It's child day. You can do this with a fork too, but it's actually much more efficient with your fingers. All that are out there. Now I'm going to go to my refrigerator and get some of the other ingredients we need. I have some fat-free milk and some eggs here. Of course, we're going to only use the egg whites. And I'm going to pour this milk into this bowl here. And then I add coffee powder, instant coffee. Make sure you don't use the real stuff or you'll get crunchy bits in your cupcakes, and that would not be good. And then some sugar. Now, the reason I add the coffee powder is it thickens up the flavor of chocolate or richens it up without adding tons of chocolate. So I use that in all my chocolate baked goods. Just about a teaspoon is perfect for that. Oh, and if you go to discoveryhealth.com, you can get all the information on all the recipes, specific amounts, tips, everything you need. And then you want to just keep whisking this for about a minute until you feel like the sugar granules have dissolved as well as the coffee. They don't have to be completely dissolved, but once you put the dry ingredients in, it's tougher. And then I'm going to get my egg whites here. And again, I just crack these, pull the yolks out with my hands. So much easier, so much quicker. There we go. Okay. Every egg yolk is 5 grams of fat. So we're taking 15 grams of fat right out of there. Throw that in this bowl. Whisk that in. And then I need some corn syrup. This also sweetens it up and adds some thickness. And then we just mix in our dry ingredients. Now, I often bake with yogurt, but in this case, the cornstarch adds a thickener. In there. It's funny, I'm gonna make my icing next. My friend Gail, her mom makes the most amazing icing. And every holiday, she'll make all sorts of cupcakes that are beautifully decorated. And I'd never had cupcakes that were so good, but then I kind of tweaked her recipe a little bit, did a little lightening to that, and I'll show you that in a minute. So I get this all mixed up here. Just want to do this long enough to get the lumps out. And you want to make sure to use a sturdy whisk for this. If you don't have one, you can use a spatula and that'll be fine. But as you can see, there's really no fattening ingredients in here. Now, I've lined the pan with silicone liners. You can use those if you don't have them. I don't know if you've seen them before. If you don't have those, you can use foil wrappers, but whatever you do, don't use the paper ones. Okay, that's looking exactly how it's supposed to. Let's transfer them to the wrappers. And you fill these about 2/3 full. Now, these liners, they're a little bit expensive, so if you don't want to spend the money on them, as I said, you can definitely use the foil liners. Just be sure that you don't get the foil liners that have paper inside of them. That'll totally trip you up. Your cupcakes will stick. Okay, that one in there. Up. Okay, get these filled up in here. Now, as I said, it's the icing where we get the fat in the cupcake. So you want to make sure you measure that carefully. A spatula to get to the end of the bowl. Okay, time to pop these in the oven. I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. Here. Put them side by side. Never bake them one on top of the other, or they won't come out right. Okay, now moving on to my icing. I have some light butter here. Now, light butter has about half the fat of normal butter, sometimes even less, depending on the brand. I have a 1/2 cup. As I said, this is where you get most of the fat from this recipe. So in the end, you'll only have 2-3 grams of fat per cupcake, but not too much. And then I'm going to add half of my powdered sugar and the vanilla and the salt. And the salt trick is one that I got from my friend Gail's mom. As I said, she made the best icing, and I couldn't figure out why it was so good. And then I realized she just spiked it with just the teeniest tiny bit of salt. I'm going to keep working on this. When I come back, we'll finish these up. Stay tuned. There's nothing better than spaghetti and meatballs, and today I've showed you some of my childhood favorites. My version of spaghetti and meatballs saves you 130 calories and 21 grams of fat. This plate right here has only 373 calories and 3 grams of fat. So you can use a little Parmesan cheese on it if you'd like. Okay, back to my Be a Babe black and white cupcakes. I'm gonna use a tablespoon measure. I'm just gonna put 1 tablespoon plus 2 teaspoons on here. It's about a tablespoon. And 2 teaspoons. 1 and 2. We want to measure this out precisely because after you want all this trouble, you don't want to go crazy on the icing since that is the place where we have the fat in these. But they only have 3 grams of fat, even with this much icing. These yummy cupcakes save you 154 calories and 18 grams of fat. For these recipes and more, go to discoveryhealth.com. Remember, just because it tastes great doesn't mean it can't be good for you. See you next time. I'm Devin Alexander.